Hey, what's going on, everybody? Samuel Akem here, and I'm back with another one. Today, we are talking about the best defensive conferences in FCS football. So, we're going to be looking at the points per game average for each conference and deciphering which conferences have the best defense. Well, actually, I ranked them from 1 all the way to 13, which conferences average the lowest points per game total and which conferences average the highest points per game total. And I think some of the numbers will be kind of interesting for some of you guys to look at, and some of them will be kind of self-explanatory, but we will get straight into the video. Hit a like, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment down below, and we will get straight into it. Okay, so the number one conference in terms of points per game total, which ranks number 1 on our list, is going to be the Ivy League at 21.33 points per game within their conference. That's all 8 teams. I think there are 8 teams in the Ivy League. That's all 8 teams in the conference. And like I said, they rank number 1. Now, take this with a grain of salt because in the Ivy League, they only play 10 games. They don't play postseason play. So obviously, take that with a grain of salt. But I think it tells a story that, you know, there are some good defenses in the Ivy League, even though they aren't playing in the postseason, even though they maybe not be playing against some of the better competition. I think it tells a story. The 2 top teams defensively in that conference are Princeton at 17.5 points per game and Columbia at 18.2 points per game. Those are the top 2 defenses in that conference. I think Yale actually won that conference, so it also tells another story that Yale is not the top 2 defensively, but even though they won the conference, I think it tells a story about the Ivy League, I think it tells a story about Yale, I think it tells a story about Princeton, Columbia. You guys can decipher what you think about that. We are going to move on to the next conference. Okay, the second conference on this list is Missouri Valley Football Conference, MVFC Conference, at 24.5 points per game. The top 2 in that league were South Dakota State at 9.27 points per game, which I think is probably one of the tops in the history of the FCS. And then you have Southern Illinois at 16.15 points per game. So 2 playoff teams are in their top 2. SDSU, obviously the national champion at 9 points a game. I would believe that if you're anywhere around 15 points per game or lower, your team is hopefully in the playoffs and hopefully competing for a national championship. I think that's a pretty good number to be around, between 15 and 10. I mean, I think anything under 10 is honestly like legendary, but around 15 to 20 is probably a good number for defenses. Probably around 15 to 17 is probably an ideal number if you want your defense to be worthwhile. But the Missouri Valley, probably collectively the best conference in FCS football and probably playing the best defense collectively in FCS football. But I think it tells a story that, you know, they're number 2 on the list. Ivy League's number 1. We will move on to the next conference. So the next conference we'll be looking at is the SWACC, who averaged a staggering 25.14 points per game. That's the Southwestern Athletic Conference, I believe is what it's called, the SWACC, one of the HBCU conferences. I think they have 12 teams in the SWACC, actually. I believe FAMU won that conference last year, if I'm not mistaken. But the top 2 teams in that conference were Alabama State at 14.45 points per game and FAMU at 15.15 points per game. So SWAC coming in at the number 3 conference in points per game. I think it tells a story about some of the FCS, but we are going to move on to the next conference. You guys let me know what you think about that. Next up at number 4 is the Southern Conference with 25.95 points per game. The top 2 in that conference are Furman at 18.23 and Mercer at 23.92. Now, once again, both of these teams were 2 playoff teams. Mercer got knocked out by South Dakota State. I believe it was in the second round, or it might have been I think it was the second round of the playoffs. And then Furman made it all the way to the quarterfinals and lost to Montana in overtime. It was a thriller. Go back and watch that game if you have not seen it. But Furman, I think, was probably one of the better teams throughout the year last year and had one of the better defenses all year last year. So no surprise that they're on here. Kind of surprised that the SoCon is this high because, you know, I feel like we see a lot of scoring in a lot of those Southern conferences. In the Southern Conference, the Southland Conference, in some of those Southern conferences, I feel like there's a lot of points being put up, but to see them fall at number 4 at 25.95 points per game is very interesting. We'll move on to the next conference. So what we're looking at right now is actually Butler versus Drake 2022 highlights, but Drake actually went undefeated in 2023, went 8-0 in the Pioneer League, and they lost their playoff game against, I believe it was North Dakota State, and then they lost their 3 non-conference games, I believe. So they were 8-4 last year, but they are not on this list, which is very interesting. Butler, St. Thomas, who actually went 7-1 in the Pioneer League, was right there behind Butler, looking to win that conference. They ended up coming up short, but I think it's very interesting that that, Butler, the conference champion, is not even on this list at number 1 or number 2. I can't remember if they fell in at 3 or 4, but I also know that they had the PFL Defensive Player of the Year, their defensive end. I can't remember his name, but they had a really good team. They had some great pieces on their team. So the fact that they were able to go 8-0, undefeated in conference, and then not even end up in the top 2 defensively in their conference is pretty interesting to me. But you guys let me know what you think about that. We will move on to the number 6 conference. The next conference we will be looking at is the Big South OVC at 26.88 points per game. They came in at 6 defensively out of all the FCS conferences. The top 2 in the Big South OVC was Eastern Illinois at 19.72 points per game and UT Martin at 24 points per game. As you might notice, as we go further down on this list of rankings of conferences, the points per game for the top 2 teams is going to get higher and higher because of obviously those outliers bring the total down for some of those teams like the Ivy League and some of the MVFC. I think, like I said, you got to take the Ivy League with a grain of salt because they're so low. They only play 10 games, so that's going to leave their number low anyway, but I think they probably play some good defense. But I think the MVC is probably the true number 1 defensive conference at 24.5 points per game. You guys can let me know what you think about it in the comments, but right now we're talking about the Big South OVC, Eastern Illinois at 19.72 and UT Martin at 24. 24 is kind of high, to be honest. I think UT Martin actually shared the title of the OVC Big South, and at 24 points per game, that's kind of crazy. And then the other person who won that conference was Gardner Webb, and they're not even on this list. I don't know if they ended up where they would have ended up in the top 3, 4, 5, but they're not on this list. But OVC Big South, very interesting that they came in at 6 for total. Very interesting. You guys let me know what you think in the comments, but I think it's interesting as we look at some of these lists and know some of the teams in some of these conferences and know how they play defense, know how they play the game. It's interesting to see where some of these conferences end up in these rankings. So we will move on to number 7 on the list. So next at number 7, we have the CAA at 27.38 points per game. The top 2 in that conference were William and Mary at 18.54 points per game and Villanova at 18.84 points per game. So pretty good defensively. I think, Villanova was one of the better defenses in the FCS last year. William and Mary was one of the better defenses in the FCS last year. William and Mary had those 2 defensive ends, I believe, or 2 D linemen who were really tearing it up. One of their D ends was really tearing it up most of the season. But I think they started off the season kind of strong and kind of waned off. CAA is interesting because they actually had 3 people share the title, which was Richmond, Villanova, and then you had Albany, who also got to share the title, all 3 at 7-1. CAA being the biggest conference in 2023, they fielded 15 teams. I think in 2024 they're going to field 16 teams, so they're only getting bigger. But I think it's safe to say that with the CAA, they probably have a lot of really good defensive teams in that conference, but being that it's so big, some of those outliers, some of those higher teams, some of those lower teams are going to outweigh the number and bring the number up. But CAA falling at number 7, very interesting. I think it's very interesting that we still haven't seen the Big Sky. The Big Sky had probably top 3 defense in the FCS last year in Montana, and Montana State with a pretty decent defense as well. And we haven't even seen the conference on the list. Very interesting. We'll see where they end up on this list. We're going to move on to number 8. So next, we have the Northeast Conference falling in at number 8, which I would personally call probably the worst FCS conference in the whole division. No offense to anybody who plays in the NEC, but they came in at 27.63 points per game as a conference, and the top 2 in that conference are Merrimack at 21.45 points per game and Sacred Heart at 24.72 points per game. I think it tells a story, one, that Duquesne, who was the conference champ, is not even one of the top 2 defensively in that conference, but also I think it tells its own story that the top 2 in that conference were at 21.45 points per game and 24.72 points per game, with Sacred Heart at 24.72 points per game. I think that's crazy. That's absolutely insane that the top 2 defenses in the conference, and this is why I say it's probably the worst conference in FCS football, just because of some of the competition, some of the level of competition that you play against in that NEC conference is kind of lower tier. I know Duquesne, I don't think that conference has a lot of money either. They play against a lot of bigger FBS schools, I think, to make up for deficits within their revenue. But the NEC falling in at number 8, higher than the Big Sky, higher than the Patriot League, higher than the Southland. So, I mean, I think that tells a story. But number 8 at the list is NEC with 27.63 points per game. We will move on to the next conference. Okay. Next, at number 9, we will be looking at the MEAC conference coming in at number 9 with 27.87 points per game. The top 2 schools in that conference are actually the 2 schools we're watching right now, which was Howard at 23.75 points per game and Morgan State at 21.4 points per game. Once again, I will point out that I think it's kind of crazy that, as you see, we go down further on the list, there's going to be worse defenses in the conference, but I think you can tell which conferences are collectively bad defensively and which conferences are collectively pretty good defensively. The Ivy League probably collectively pretty decent at defense. The MVFC, we all know, is pretty good at defense. The SWACC, kind of a surprise to me coming in at number 3, but the SoCon, I believe that they played pretty good defense for the most of the year. But then coming down here, you got Morgan State, Howard. Howard actually won the MEAC in 2023, I believe. I can't remember if Howard went to the Celebration Bowl. I actually don't remember who won the Celebration Bowl this year, but Howard finished the season 6-6, but were able to win that MEAC conference. There's only 6 teams in the MEAC conference, so these are teams that play quite a bit non-conference games as well, but I think it's very interesting to see the MEAC come in at 27.87 points per game at number 9 on this list. You guys let me know what you think about that. We will move on to the next conference. So coming in at number 10 on our list is the Southland Conference at 28.4 points per game. The top 2 in that conference are Incarnate Word at 19.5 and Lamar at 23.54 points. Once again, the team that won the conference is not one of the top 2 defensively. The team that won the Southland Conference in 2023 was actually Nicholls State. I can't remember where they fell on this list. They might have been 3, 4, or 5, but they had a 6-5 record in 2023. I think a lot of those losses came from non-conference FBS schools, and then obviously they lost in the playoffs. But this is a school that went 6-5 in the regular season, but were able to go undefeated, I believe, in conference play. It said they went 7-0 in conference play, but this is also a school in Nicholls State that lost a game, had to forfeit a game due to a shooting happening. Unfortunate situation, but they were able to win the Southland Conference. But the Southland Conference, they put up a lot of points. They got Southeast Louisiana in that conference, I believe, are also in the Southland Conference, who put up a lot of points. There's a lot of good schools in that Southland Conference. Incarnate Word is another school. We watched them play Sacramento State in 2022, and they played like a 60-70 football game. I think Incarnate Word ended up winning, but it was a high-scoring football game. But Southland Conference, they are known for putting up points. They're one of the biggest conferences I think of. When I think of people that score and put up a lot of points, I think of the Southland Conference. So I'm not surprised to see them pretty low on the list. Not a big defensive conference, but you guys let me know what you think about that, and we will move on to number 11 on the list. Okay, coming in at 11, finally, is the Big Sky Conference at 28.6 points per game. The top 2 in that conference defensively were Montana at 17.2 points per game and Montana State at 21.8 points per game. Now, the Big Sky, I don't know, is really known for their defense. I know the Big Sky is known for having really good teams. Montana State, Montana, Sac State, UC Davis, Weber State has been a good team for a long time. Idaho has been coming up the last couple of years. So I think the Big Sky is a team that's been known as a conference that's been known to put out good teams. But I don't know if the Big Sky has necessarily been known as a conference that has always played good defense. I mean, I think there's good defenses here and there, but I would more so call the Big Sky more of an offensive conference than I would call it a defensive conference. But if you look at this, obviously you got Montana at top, Montana State at number 2. I think Idaho was just under Montana at like 22 points a game. But like I said, you see some of these values go up. Obviously you got Montana under 20, but I think everybody else in the conference, I know everybody else in the conference was over 20. So you only got one school averaging 20 points per game. And then you look at some of these higher conferences like the MVFC, like the SoCon, you got multiple teams averaging under 20 points per game. So that's definitely why the Big Sky is so high. I was surprised to see the Big Sky at number 10 on the list out of all FCS conferences. You're kind of splitting hairs because it's a point here, a point there, but when you're dealing with averages, those differences, those little point differences are big differences in the amount of scoring being done. So I will say this, there's probably a lot more scoring in the Big Sky than some of these conferences, so that's why the defenses seem to be worse, because the offenses are able to put up more points. I think there's better competition in the Big Sky compared to a lot of the FCS FCS. I fully believe that, and I would not get off of saying that for anything. I think the Big Sky is one of the better conferences in the FCS, and I think they play a better level of competition than a lot of these conferences out here, and I think that's probably why, there's a lot of points being put up. But that could say something about some of the other conferences as well. They might have better defensive coaching. They might have, who knows what they might have better of. But Big Sky coming in at number 11 on this list. You guys let me know what you think about that. We will move on to the next conference. So coming in at number 12 on this list of 13 FCS conferences is the United Athletic Conference. I was not very surprised to see them this low on this list. 28.92 points per game is the average for that conference, and the top two in that conference are University of Central Arkansas at 23 points a game and Southern Utah at 23.72 points per game. I think that was their first full season maybe their second or third full season in the United Athletic Conference. But two of the best defensive teams in that conference are averaging 23 points a game. So I mean, that tells the whole story about the UAC conference in general. I believe Austin P won that conference in 2023. There, once again, just like we've seen all the way down this list, a bunch of the top teams don't even end up on this list. And I think it's actually telling that if you're one of the top defensive teams in your conference, you are in the playoffs. I mean, let's look at some of these teams that ended up in the top two. In the Ivy League, you got Princeton, Columbia. They don't play in the playoffs. In the MVFC, you got SDSU, SIU, both playoff teams. In the SWAC, you got ASU, FAMU. They don't play in the playoffs. In the SoCon, you got Furman, Mercer, two playoff teams. In the Pioneer, Butler, St. Thomas, not playoffs. And the Big South, you got EIU and UT Martin. UT Martin, I believe, made the playoffs, if I'm not mistaken. In the CAA, you got William & Mary and Villanova. Villanova was a playoff team. In the NEC, you got Merrimack and Sacred Heart, not playoff teams. In the MEAC, you got Morgan State, Howard. They don't play in the playoffs. In the Southland, you got Incarnate Word and Lamar. I actually can't remember if Incarnate Word at 8-2 made the playoffs. I don't think they did. But Incarnate Word, you got the Big Sky, Montana State, two playoff teams. In the UAC, you got UCA, University of Central Arkansas, and Southern Utah, not playoff teams. And then we'll talk about our last conference once we get to it. But you guys let me know what you guys think about the United Athletic Conference coming in at 12. I was not very surprised. I think they field 8 teams. Let me go. UAC, what do they have in the UAC? They got 9 teams in the UAC. I think they might be either losing a team or adding a team in 2024. I can't remember, but they come in at number 12 on the list, 28.92 points per game. Not very surprising. You guys let me know what you think about that. We'll move on to the last conference. Last, but certainly not least, we have the Patriot League at 29.12 points per game. The top two in that conference were Lafayette at 23.33 points per game and Fordham at 24.72 points per game. Now, the Patriot League is a conference that's on the East Coast, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think these are teams that are playing against a lot of FBS competition in their first 3 or 4 weeks of the season. You got Lafayette in that conference, you got Fordham in that conference, you got Holy Cross in that conference, some of the bigger teams in that conference. I was kind of surprised to see Holy Cross not in the top 2. Lafayette actually won the Patriot League over Holy Cross in 2023, and they were the number 1 team at 23.33 points per game in that conference. Very surprising to see the Patriot League down here. I think Holy Cross is one of the better teams in the subdivision. Also, Lafayette is an up-and-coming team. Fordham's been good for years in the past. But to see Holy Cross not on here and to see that the conference averages almost 30 points per game, there has to be a reason for that. I don't know what the reason is. Maybe a lot of hefty non-conference scheduled games, or maybe they're just putting up points in the Patriot League. But very interesting development right there with them coming in at the number 13 team. You guys let me know what you think about my list in the comments. I appreciate you guys for tapping into this video. That was my rankings, not even my rankings. That was the rankings of the best defensive conferences by points per game average. This is not how I rank these defenses, or this is not how I rank these conferences. This is how these conferences are ranked based off how many points per game they are allowing. And you guys let me know what you think about this list in the comments. Thank you guys for tapping in. Leave a like, leave a comment. Let me know what you guys think about this video. Let me know what you guys want to see next, and I will see you guys next time.